and then you can come up to the microphone. Her name is Emily Baer. Give her a hand so she gets so excited. Woo! We did it. We did it.
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Okay. Who's going to start the timer? Thank you. So, in the summer of my 11th year, things got off to a pretty regular start. I was, of course, excited for a season of adventuring, and my days were spent doodling or playing or at the beach with my brother. And then, of course, at the end, there was the fairly traditional big trip before the school year started again. This year, our big trip was to Dakar, Senegal. My family lived at that point in Cape Verde, West Africa. My mom had taken a position with the Peace Corps as a medical officer, and we'd been there for a few years at that point, her doing important work and us in tow. At first involuntarily and then very enthusiastically. So that summer when we left for Dakar, it was a pretty normal, pretty usual affair. We left the airport in Santiago and flew to Dakar, which is the capital of Senegal. And the plane was full of tourists and Cape Verdeans and fellow travelers and a woman with chickens. And it smelled strongly of gasoline at the beginning, but that passed quickly. It sort of drifted off behind us, which was a relief. And when we landed in Dakar, I'll just say that my brother and I mostly, while we were in Africa, didn't know what was happening. So this was no exception. We landed in Dakar knowing that our destination was a wildlife sanctuary 5 hours north of the city called Djoudj National Park. And Djoudj is famous for being home to a pretty epic pelican migration. And my dad has always been a birder, and so we sort of centered our trip around our own northward migration towards the birds. So we got to Dakar and had, went around to see Peace Corps friends and embassy coworkers. And Andrew and I were acting as the sort of de facto translators for the trip. We were put in a position of power that we didn't know we had. And we had been going to a French school for a few years, and so our French was pretty good. My mom's was, okay, and my dad's was mostly like, oh, oui. So we were in charge, basically. My parents, the intrepid travelers that they were, decided that even though not many people did this, and most people suggested not to, that we would rent a car when we got to country and take ourselves around. Most Peace Corps staff and embassy workers had drivers, and for many good and bad reasons, that's the way things were done. But my mom and dad thought that no, we were going to be the masters of our own destiny, and we would take our own car. So we rented a car, and my memory is that there was a decal on the side that said like, rented car, tourists. But I don't know if that was my 11-year-old perception or if it actually was. And I asked my parents for confirmation, and they could neither confirm nor deny the existence of that vinyl. So regardless, we left the airport in the rented car. We'd done our tours, and the map that we had of Dakar was conceptual at best. There were not, this was like before the time of Yelp reviews and Google Maps and GPS, or really before Dakar was fully mapped for a tourist in general. And so we took a lot of wrong turns and a lot of detours and a lot of what my mom would call the scenic view of the city. And it was beautiful. It was a bustling city, a beautiful metropolis, very different from where we'd been before. But overwhelming, and I can't imagine having been the driver. So Andrew and I sat in the back of that car, I think it was a Peugeot, and sort of drove around wide-eyed in wonder, asking when the next food stop was going to be and if there were any snacks in the car. And my parents sort of tried to navigate the scene for us. At one point, we were driving up a street that we realized we should only be going the other direction, and my mom pulled a U-turn, which seems reasonable and safe. But someone flagged us over relatively soon, and it turns out this man was a authority figure, maybe an actual cop. And he leaned over to the window and he said something, and my mom and dad sort of looked at each other, and then he said something again, and my mom turned around and looked at us. And so Andrew and I leaned forward and looked at each other, and we're like, oh my God, they're so embarrassing. And so then Andrew and I started translating what this man was asking of my parents. And he said that we had taken a U-turn, correct, without using a blinker. And that was very bad, and that he was here to correct our actions and to demand, actually, that we pay him for our error, and then we could be free, or we could go with him somewhere. And so I was translating this to my mom, like, so embarrassing. And she was like, I'm not paying. And I was like, Mom, you gotta pay him. Anyways, she paid him. The man sort of nodded at us, and Andrew and I thought we'd done our job quite well. And then the man leaned over again and said, can you give me a ride back to the station? So we gave him a ride back to the station, and then my parents decided that that was enough. The conceptual map business wasn't working to our favor, and we would head north to Jewage. And so we did, and it was beautiful. The pelicans were amazing. We were met by 10,000 of them on the river. The colors were incredible. All the browns that you could imagine and never imagine. All the reds, all the greens, all the blues. The people were kind. The food was delicious. The hibiscus tea stained our teeth. It was amazing. On the way back, we were sort of still in this like la-la land, not really thinking. Andrew and I were in the backseat again, exhausted. The map at this point had been sort of, jettisoned to the side because we just knew we were on a straight track back to Dakar, and then we'd catch a flight home and be back. So I don't really remember too much of the drive back, but just before dusk, I remember looking out the sky and being just like totally mesmerized by the color that it was changing into. It wasn't purple, and it wasn't blue, it wasn't pink, and it wasn't really anything. It was just so incredible. And then suddenly really becoming quite dark. And it was at that point that we all sort of noticed something in the middle of the road, and it looked like maybe an accident or something. And so Andrew and I leaned forward through the seats, and my parents sort of leaned forward, and my mom sat up a little straighter, and my dad was doing this like egret thing. And we were trying to figure out what was going on, and then very quickly it became apparent that it was a group of men standing in the road, and then very, very quickly after that they had guns. And it appeared to be not an accident at all, that these men had, maybe policemen, maybe not, had decided that they were going to create a traffic stop in the middle of the road. And so as we approached, we could feel my mom sort of tapping on the brakes and slowing down, and I could hear her whispering to my dad. Obviously, I was like this far from them, but so they're sort of consternating about what to do and trying to decide, and Andrew and I are looking at each other like, this is more than embarrassing. This is something else. And so we pull up to the stop, and it was very much like the stop that we'd had in Dakar. A man walked over and motioned for my mom to roll down the window, and she did. And he leaned over, and Andrew and I sort of like rallied ourselves and leaned forward also, ready to do our job. And, he started into a spiel about like, did you notice back there when you were coming straight down this road? I can't remember what infraction he was angry about, but I sort of started to translate maybe to my mom, or she probably could just tell by the tone. And I could feel both my parents sitting up a little bit straighter, and Andrew was sort of like, I don't know. He stopped translating with me, and so I was trying to figure out what this guy wanted, and he also wanted something from us because of where we were and where we were going. And so I'm like looking around, there's a pause, and my parents aren't really reacting, and we're all looking around the car, and there's a small crowd of men, and so I'm sort of waiting for my mom to tell me what embarrassing thing to translate back to next. And my mom turns around, and I expect her to say, like, tell this man that we're not paying him a goddamn cent. But she didn't. She turned around, and she said, Emily, Andrew, lie down. Pretend you're invisible. And about 10 seconds later, she gunned it. She gunned it. I don't know. I can't remember if I turned around or if I was just watching the horror on my dad's face as he watched what was happening behind us. All I know is that I grabbed onto my brother's hand harder than I ever had, And I looked at him and I said, we're invisible, we're invisible, we're invisible. Thank you.